And then Lila, I'd like you to just introduce yourself so folks know who our sponsor is. But I'm Mark Doctor. I'm with the Federal Highway Administration, the FHWA's Resource Center, Safety and Design technical team, and I'll be the lead facilitator or presenter for the workshop today, part of our Raging Aging Pop-Up Symposium. I love that name, Lila. So let me turn it over to Lila to introduce herself and maybe talk about the Raging Aging Symposium.
All right, I can't take credit for that name. That's all Jim Kelly. We'll get to him in a moment. My name is Lila Ralston. I am the program consultant for the 55 plus driver safety program under the injury prevention section of the Georgia Department of Public Health. We are a resource to other traffic safety stakeholders in the area of older driver safety. We manage the Yellow Dot program and the CarFit program here locally in Georgia. We also lead the 55 plus driver safety task team, which reports to the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. If you find yourself in need of data and resources, we are your go-to folks. So give us an email or a call. Later on, my boss, Jim Kelly, program manager of the 55 plus driver safety program, will be popping in, and our boss, Elizabeth Head, who is deputy director of the injury prevention section and manager of the healthy aging program, will also be coming in. Reminding everyone this session is being recorded, and we will email all participants and let you know when that recording is posted. If you need something or have a technical difficulty, raise your hand or use the chat and we will see what we can do about that. I'd also like to take this opportunity to invite anyone interested, particularly if you're in the state of Georgia, to consider joining our task team. We're always recruiting folks, could use your expertise and your input. And I'll throw it back to you, Mark.
All right, Lila, thank you very much. This is great. So let me share my screen here. And so Lila, if you could just confirm that you're seeing that okay. Thank you.
Got it.
All right, great. And again, the chat pod, please enter questions into the chat pod, questions, comments. I'll try to take pauses along the way and answer questions. I can't see the chat pod right now, but we'll take pauses every once in a while. But again, just welcome everybody. This is a class that we have historically done in person, and I'm sure we would all love to get back to the days when we can do in-person training. But until then, we're fortunate to be able to do things like this over Zoom. So this is a practitioner-based or engineering or transportation professional practitioner-based workshop, but certainly others find it of interest as well. And I do want to thank the Georgia Governor's Office of Highway Safety and the Georgia Department of Public Health for sponsoring and conducting these workshops. It was a year ago that we held the with the Federal Highway Administration. I am physically housed in Atlanta, but I do work all around the country and partner with many of our state DOTs, but very glad that Georgia has continued this particular workshop. So just to kind of go over what we're going to cover today, or the timeline. We have a morning component. We should finish up around 11:30 for the first piece. We're going to talk about why we do this course. And what's the reason we're focusing on how to design or operate roadways for the aging population? What's so different or special about that? Well, we'll kind of cover those. And we'll do so by going over some feelings of what it's like to be a aging driver, an older driver. I'm getting there myself, where I just notice things with eyesight. And so we're going to cover from a more scientific perspective what are the typical diminishing capabilities, the visual, the physical, and the cognitive that influence our skills and abilities on the road. But the good news is there are things that we can do to accommodate that. So we're going to talk about design and operational recommendations that come from a Federal Highway Administration handbook on strategies. And you should have received in the mail, maybe not everyone, I understand there were some folks that may have registered late, but Jim Kelly did try to mail out a box of materials, and so you should have the participant workbook, a abridged version of the FHWA handbook. The entire handbook is available on our webpage. I'll give you that web link, but the condensed version, the technical briefing is kind of the condensed what you need to know, and that's what we're going to be going through mostly today, with intersections being a big chunk of that. So we'll take a break around 11:30, come back at 1:30, and finish up. We may not get through all of the recommendations on intersections. That's really the meat of the handbook, but then we'll also finish up talking about freeways, freeway segments, interchanges, and roadway segments. So the question of why are we talking about designing and operating roads for an aging population? Well, the answer is we are an aging society. If we look at how many older users are on the road, it's a exponentially increasing number almost. And the number of Americans age 65 and older is projected to nearly double by the year 2060. So what that means for us as engineers or as practitioners, we select a representative sample to design off of, right? Like we select a designed vehicle, and then we lay out the dimensions of a roadway based upon the capabilities or the physical aspects of a designed vehicle. Well, we also design off of a human being, right? What are the abilities of the human being, whether it be something like the walking speed of a pedestrian or the perception reaction time of a driver. And so we have to make assumptions about what is a design user. And it's not the worst case scenario, but maybe like an 85th percentile or a 90th percentile of the representative population. So what this means is that the representative population of users is getting older. And so if we're going to design for that, that can influence some of our considerations. And that's really what this course is about. Now, when it comes to older drivers, there's a lot of good news. Statistically, older drivers are safer drivers. The data shows that older drivers are less likely to drive while under the influence of alcohol. So drunk driving is not, this isn't a totally true story, but it's mostly true that statistically older drivers tend to be safer drivers, less aggressive, less likely to be speeding, driving recklessly, less likely to be under the influence of alcohol. Now, there's obviously issues with other types of impairment, drug related. We do see issues with people that for whatever reason may have overprescribed, underprescribed, whatever. There's always issues, but generally speaking, if we compare to the overall population, we see that older drivers have lower rates of involvement in crashes. That's great. Now, here's the not so good news. When older drivers are involved in a collision, they tend to be more injured or more likely to suffer a fatality or severe injury outcome. And this is particularly true for the over 80 segment of the population. Now, what this basically means is that as a older user, we become frail, our bodies become frail, or we have other underlying health conditions that may make surviving or recovering from a crash much more difficult. So you take the same crash say between two vehicles, and you have a younger, healthy teenager, someone 18, 19 years old, with no underlying health conditions, but yet you take the same scenario and you substitute that younger driver with someone in their 80s, maybe with underlying health conditions, and it just becomes more difficult to recover from that. So we see an overrepresentation of older drivers in the more severe or fatal outcomes. So even though they're less likely to be involved in a crash in the first place, when they are involved in a crash, unfortunately, it tends to be more severe. So for that higher aged population, and age is just a number. We all age at different rates. But the increase in the US population of that 85 and older segment is also getting much, much higher. And so what we're seeing is more people driving, more drivers out there that are in that 80 and above age group. And by 2050, that 85 plus population will be nearly 3 times what it is today. Now, this is definitely a concern for Georgia. And in fact, in our governor's Office of Highway Safety, Georgia Highway Safety's plan, the strategic plan, older driver safety is identified as an area of focus, of concern. And that's partly why we're here today, thanks to the Governor's Office of Highway Safety and Georgia Department of Public Health for sponsoring this workshop. And in Georgia, drivers 55 and above make up over a quarter of all drivers involved in fatal collisions. And compared to other states, other neighboring states, that percentage of involvement of older drivers in crashes does stand out for Georgia. And we in Georgia are a state where for many great reasons people choose to retire here. So it's not just that we are naturally an aging society, but Georgia is also attracting more older people for retirement. And what that essentially means is more older drivers on the road. So that is why this issue of what can we do as a transportation practitioner community, what can we do to accommodate the aging population? Well, the Federal Highway Administration has put out a handbook for designing roadways for the aging population. And the entire handbook is available at this webpage, and hopefully you've received the abridged version of the handbook. And another concept that I would like to cover at this point, because I think it relates very nicely to this concept, is the safe system approach. This is another philosophy or approach that the Federal Highway Administration is advocating for. And it acknowledges that as human beings, as drivers, as bicyclists, pedestrians, users of the roadway, we are inevitably going to make mistakes. We will never be perfect at any age, whether it's a younger driver who's just starting out and learning, or even an older driver with 50, 60 years of driving experience, but we still are subject to error and mistakes. And on the roadways, those mistakes can lead to crashes. Well, under the safe system approach, we acknowledge that crashes are going to happen. The goal is to make those crashes survivable. And that's where the other elements of a safe system kick in. The advancements in vehicle safety technology, things like lane assist, emergency braking systems. All of these are part of advancing toward a safe system approach. And they are also very helpful for our aging users. Safe speeds. The outcome of a crash, the survivability of a crash, or the probability of a fatal or severe outcome is highly dependent upon the amount of kinetic energy that was involved in that collision. So to make crashes more survivable, lower speeds are a big part of that. So safe speeds, safe roadways, where we try to design and operate the road to first try to avoid the likelihood of an error occurring. But then when an error does occur, to make things like our roadsides survivable, so that if someone has to leave the roadway that they don't encounter a utility pole or a tree or a ditch that causes them to flip over. So all of these things that we have historically done and will continue to do help promote this concept of survivability to accommodate human mistakes. And then that last line of defense is post-crash care. If a crash does occur, getting rapid and effective medical emergency services out there, but also post-crash care involves the forensics side as well, where we look at what could we do, or is there anything else we can do at a location, say where a crash occurred, to try to mitigate any potential safety issues. So that is the safe system approach, and it applies to all safety, but I think in particular, it has a great relationship to what we are trying to do with regard to enhancing our system, our roadway system, to be forgiving and accommodating of error, especially error that may occur as we get older, but make the outcome more survivable by recognizing that as human beings, we have a certain threshold for tolerating the collision forces before harm occurs. So that's the safe system approach. So let me take a little this change in position here, and I just want you to think, just as a driver yourself, and when you're out on the road, if you've ever experienced say being behind an older driver or next to an older driver on the road, and just think, what are some of the things that you've observed that as a fellow driver annoys you? So go ahead and type it into the chat pod if you don't mind. I'll try and pull up the chat pod here and see some answers. Just type in the chat pod if there's anything that you have observed as a fellow driver of older drivers that just kind of irritates you or annoys you. Go ahead and type it in. Yeah, driving slow, slower than Christmas. Thank you, Tom. That's funny. Yeah, so okay, driving slow, good one. And merging without looking. Excellent. Okay, riding the brakes. Yeah, very cautious, very hesitant, riding the brakes. Good. Thanks, Ellen. They drive more cautiously or slowly. Yep. However, yesterday I observed an older driver blowing her horn at anyone delaying her. Good for her, right? Yeah. So sometimes we we shouldn't over stereotype, and right, just because someone is older doesn't mean they've lost their their spirit in any way, or sometimes even aggressiveness, right? But that's good. Us old folks have limited time left for slow driving. Okay, I want to get to where I'm going quickly because, hey, I'm running out of time. Funny, good stuff. I'm about to shoot the gas. Good stuff. All right, well, thank you, everybody. This is good, and yeah, we've all experienced this as older, or we've all experienced this perhaps as just drivers on the road, and but there's reasons why. So if you think about it, let's see here. So yeah, they drive slow, or they leave the blinker on the turn signal. They're hesitant. Okay, well, there's usually reasons why, and that's what this next section is going to try to give us an appreciation for really what it's like to be a aging road user. And we're going to talk about some of the visual, physical, and cognitive driving related capabilities that may diminish as we age. They don't always diminish, and they may diminish at different rates depending upon aging. So we all age at different rates, different levels, but there are examples where these diminishing capabilities can influence how we design and operate our roads to better meet this natural aging process. So from the visual standpoint, there's reduced visual acuity, there's reduced contrast sensitivity, the area of visual attention, the perception to changes in motion, increased sensitivity to glare, and decreased dark adaptation. So reduced visual acuity, this is the one that's perhaps the most common It's the sharpness of our vision. And so things like the ability to read a road sign, the ability to discern the letters or numbers on a sign at a given distance is an example of what can be influenced with reduced visual acuity. It can make it more difficult to also perceive roadway features, maybe barriers, curbing, driveway connections, all of these things. Driving is by nature a very visual task. We really need to be able to see to drive. So visual acuity, and the laws vary by state. But here in Georgia, we can get a license with 20/60 vision in at least one eye, and then that's with or without corrective lenses. But with corrective lenses, at least 20/60 vision. So what is 20/60 vision really like? And I love that picture of the it's a blind window blinds company and blind man driving. So sometimes it may seem like we have people driving that maybe are blind, but 20/60 vision by law, that's really what you need. So as an example, or just as a representative sense of what 20/60 vision might be. Of course, we typically measure visual acuity with something like the standard eye chart. You've probably seen this, and whenever you go to the eye doctor to get an exam, I'm sure you do that one eye at a time, right? And it can get pretty challenging sometimes to look at that bottom level. And just remember, 20/20 vision is not perfect vision. 20/20 vision is like the baseline, that what's considered typical vision. And so if you have better than 20/20 vision, that's great. You're on that high end of the spectrum. And we kind of measure that old 20/20, 20/30, 20/40. It's really based upon the size of the letter at a given distance that you can see. So in your workbook, and hopefully most people at least did receive a workbook in the mail. I'd encourage you to get that out and kind of page through it as we're going along here. The workbook doesn't exactly match every slide that we're covering. We had to do a little condensation, some abridgments, but in your workbook, you'll see it's a full-size page that resembles this eye chart. And also in the box materials, Jim should have sent you some reading glasses. That's what a set of readers, and also, if we had enough of them, certain filters that would go over your glasses to represent things like cataracts, and also the yellowing of our eye lenses over time. So one activity that's relatively easy to do is it's not perfectly calibrated. It's very much an approximation, but it's a fun activity. If you take the eye chart that's in your workbook, and if you put on your reading glasses, and of course reading glasses are intended for near things to help us see near, and it blurs things that are further away. So by putting on your reading glasses and looking at something in the distance, it actually should be a little blurry. So the eye chart in your handbook, if you hold it up at arm's length, so if you just hold that piece of paper up at arm's length with your glasses on, that is a rough approximation of the 20/60 vision, and so it gives you a sense of well, it may seem a little dangerous, right? You probably wouldn't want to drive with these reading glasses on as you're looking at things out at a distance that should seem a little blurry and fuzzy. But that's a rough indication of 20/60 vision, which is legal, and you're able to get a driver's license with that. So another visual capability is contrast sensitivity, being able to distinguish objects of similar brightness or color from a background. So think in terms of a pavement marking, a stripe or an edge line on the roadway, and those naturally fade, but also our ability to discern the marking from the background pavement, or a curb from the roadway, or curb from even the grassed area, especially on, say, not a bright sunny day, but maybe a foggy day, or maybe in the morning period. So things seem a little ill-defined, maybe fuzzy edges, and during lower light fog conditions, it can be problematic, but it also gets more problematic as we age, and we may develop cataracts. So a cataract condition may contribute further to this blurriness. So here's just an example of what it may look like on the road on a foggy or cloudy day, and with the normal contrast sensitivity versus someone who may have poor contrast sensitivity, whether it be cataracts or other visual conditions. And we're not able to see that clear definition. And so something like a child stepping out onto the street may not be readily apparent. So contrast sensitivity is typically something we don't test for. There are tests that can be performed, but typically it's not something tested for to get a driver's license. Another visual capability is the area of visual attention. The way our eyes work is we have a very narrow useful or functional field of view. So for example, if you're reading something, if you're reading words on a page, you have to look right at that letter or right at the word, and what's to the side can be very blurry. Well, it's similar when you're driving. And if you're focusing attention on something, so if we're focusing our attention on reading a road sign or on looking at a traffic signal head, the periphery, even though we're seeing it, we're not seeing it with sharpness. We're not seeing it with a lot of detail. And that detail and sharpness actually even diminishes with age, or it can diminish with age. That visual field of attention may become narrower. So that acute vision field for even younger people, it's a very narrow cone. That's if we're going to read a sign, if we're actually going to read the letters on a sign, we do so with the sharpness of cone is usually 2 to 4 degrees. But then that periphery, where maybe we see something moving, where we see motion, that useful field of view is about a 20 to 30 degree cone, and really the total cone is maybe at best 180 degrees. If you take want to do a test, if you hold your arms out to the side and start wiggling your fingers, and I'm going to get it in the camera, if you start wiggling your fingers out to the side and look straight ahead and start moving your arms in, at what point do you see your fingers start to wiggle? All right, so that kind of is a quick and easy assessment of determining your horizontal field of view. This is the part of the class that I miss not being live and in person, because I get to see people, with their arms out, wiggling their fingers, or putting on the glasses and trying to read an eye chart, but we'll replicate it at home, and you don't have to worry about looking silly. There's none of that here. But just give it a try if you would like to. The other capabilities, the reduced perception in motion, as we are moving and looking at cars coming at us. A classic example is at an intersection. So if you're, say, at the minor leg of a intersection, you're maybe at a stop sign, and you're trying to judge for a gap in traffic in both directions. Well, we have to make judgments, and our judgments of how fast a car is going, how fast is it moving, how much distance do I have between myself and that car that's approaching. All of those decisions, all of that determination is made visually. We are trying to use our perception of seeing that car coming at us to make a judgment of its speed and relative distance from us. Well, that ability, that judgment of traffic gaps can diminish with age. And it's challenging at any age, actually, because the physics of what we are seeing, what our eyes and what our brain is processing in terms of the relative size of that image, a car coming at us at a given rate of speed, it's not until that vehicle coming at us is pretty close that we start to notice a significant change in the perceived size of that image. In other words, from 1,000 feet away to 500 feet away, the actual size of that image, that car coming at us, it's minimal. But then when it gets really closer, we start to notice that image is getting bigger. So we're making these judgments, and they're tough judgments to make at any age, but it gets easier, it gets harder as we get older. And this is particularly why intersections are troublesome for older drivers. The ability to judge for gaps in oncoming traffic. So think in terms of a permissive left turn. So you're at an intersection, a signalized intersection. It's a flashing yellow arrow or a green ball, and not a green arrow, not a protected left, but a permissive left. And we really have to judge for gaps in oncoming traffic. We have to make judgments about speed, distance, and if we get it wrong and it results in a collision, those tend to be pretty severe, those T-bone type crashes, those angle crashes from left turns. So there's a reason why older drivers have that challenge, and it's just due to this change in our ability to make those judgments. At nighttime, increased sensitivity to glare, so like headlights, oncoming headlights can produce challenges. Our eyes have it takes longer for us to recover. So kind of like going into a dark movie theater as well. I remember when I was younger, I had no problem. I could go into a dark theater. I could see if a seat was empty. Now, not that I've been in a movie theater since COVID, but now I'd like to get to the theater early before the preview starts, so I could see where the empty seats are, because our ability to go from a bright condition to a darker condition diminishes as we age. It's just a natural part of the aging process. But on the roadway, things like where we have lighting, maybe a well-lit intersection to a darker unlit roadway segment, or maybe where there's ambient lighting conditions, maybe a lot of signing or lighting of businesses and parking lots, and then we hit a darker spot. So our ability to adjust, or have our eyes adjust from high lighting to low lighting, that the time it takes to make that adjustment diminishes, and during that interim period, we're just not seeing as sharply. So those are 6 examples of visual capabilities that diminish with age. And there's an activity in your workbook, and actually I'd like to do this a little differently. So this is in your workbook, but I just drew from it. So here are some examples of potential safety enhancements and how they can be potential mitigation strategies for some of these diminished visual capabilities. So for example, roadway lighting. And again, just type in the chat pod if you don't mind. So numbers, we can do 1 through 6. We've got 6 types of diminished capabilities, where 1 is diminished visual acuity, and 6 being decreased dark adaptation. So starting with roadway lighting, what do you think lighting can help serve as a mitigation strategy for? Just type in some of the whether it's a 1, 2, 1 through 6, all of them, whatever you think. Just go ahead and type it in if you don't mind. Thank you, Thomas. So yeah, increased sensitivity to glare. Yep. And 2, 6, and 5. Yeah. So reduced Visual contrast sensitivity, good. I would certainly agree with that. Increased sensitivity to glare and dark adaptation. Yep, absolutely. Good. Yeah, thank you, Phil. That's for the second one, protected only signal phasing. Kind of hinted at this earlier, but protected only signal phasing. What do you think that's a good mitigation for? Just go ahead and type it in, or I'm not sure if you may not have the ability to unmute at this point. So yeah, just keep typing it in the chat pod if you don't mind. But I kind of gave it away. So protected only is really a big strategy to help us with the reduced perception of changes in motion, The larger signs, larger sign lettering, that's helpful for reductions in visual acuity. The high quality reflective pavement markings, that's also helpful for reduced visual contrast sensitivity. Overhead mounted lane assignment signs, that's helpful for visual acuity. No right turn on red. That's another example of a strategy that can help with reduced perception to changes in motion. And signal backplates with retroreflective borders, several, that can help in several ways. Certainly with the increased sensitivity to glare, the dark adaptation, but also can be helpful to mitigate that reduced area of visual attention, so that it helps draw our focus to the traffic signal. So just a little quick exercise. What we can do as transportation practitioners to maybe help account for this. So physical mobility, we talked about the eyesight, but let's talk a little bit about the physical mobility, reduction, strength, or range of motion in our arms, shoulders, and legs. Examples are the ability to steer, especially hard steering. Maybe something like a skewed intersection, where to make the turning movement, it really requires a lot of effort to turn the wheel, but also things like the ability to shift the foot from the accelerator to the brake pedal, maybe slowing down our perception reaction time. The upper body or the neck, the upper torso and neck, sometimes the ability to turn the head becomes more difficult as we age. That can make it harder to look for gaps. If we're at an intersection and we want to make a right turn or a left turn, and we have to look in both directions, there are sometimes the limitation is so bad that if someone can't turn their neck, they actually have to turn their whole body, the whole upper torso of the body. So that can become a challenge. And perhaps in your materials, you also received a neck brace. I'm not sure if we had enough neck braces for everyone. But that's another activity that we do in the live class. If you put on your neck brace, it kind of simulates that difficulty in turning your neck. And if you put your neck brace on, you put your reading glasses on, you put your filter on, and let's say you try to read your eye chart, you get a good sense of what it might be like to be a older driver on the road. And then cognitive capabilities, selective attention, perception reaction time, and working memory. These are also things that can diminish as we age. So selective attention abilities. In the driving task, even though we think we are good multitaskers, we really aren't. And we kind of focus on what is expected, or we focus on what we think is the higher priority task. And so if we're looking at a traffic signal and just making sure that the light is green, our attention may not be to our side, where maybe a vehicle is pulling out, or a pedestrian might be walking across the street. So our ability to even see these unexpected things. So you may hear the phrase, oh, the vehicle came out of nowhere, that car came out of nowhere, or that pedestrian came out of nowhere after a crash. Well, no, they didn't come out of nowhere. They just came out of a place where maybe we weren't expecting them. And that is it's human nature, but it also is something that even diminishes further as we age, and it's called attentional blindness. And it's not just unique to the aging population. It's really something we all experience. And I'm not going to play the video now, but in your book, in your workbook, there's a web link, and it's research done by Dan Simon, Dr. Dan Simon, on attentional blindness. It's really fun. If you haven't seen that demonstration before, it's really eye-opening. It's amusing. So maybe during the break, it'd be good. I'd encourage you to play that video. It's fun, and if you enjoy it, you may want to share it with your family or friends as well. But another cognitive related ability is perception, reaction, time. It's the time to observe something, but then initiate a physical response. So, for example, seeing something in the roadway that we have to stop for, whether it's the car in front of us braking, or an object in the road that we have to stop or go around for, or a pedestrian that's maybe crossing somewhere where we wouldn't expect, not at a mid-block crosswalk or at an intersection. Whatever the case is, there are a lot of things where we have to observe and then react. And so perception reaction time, that time increases naturally as we age. And then the last working memory skill, it's how much information we can hold in our brains, and on the driving task, it can include things like a dynamic message sign. So we're indicating that maybe an exit is closed, or a detour is ahead. And if we're asking people to take an action, maybe exit at a certain location for a detour, the ability to hold that information, we're limited in how many bits of information we can hold, and for how long we can hold them. And then if something else comes along that we have to try to remember, it can wipe out the piece of information that we were previously trying to remember. So we started off this section talking about, are there things about older drivers that annoy us? And hopefully now we have a better sense perhaps of why they go slower, why they might ride the brake, why they're hesitant in certain areas. So it's generally a function of our diminished capabilities. So let me take a pause here and just see, let me see if we have any questions. Let me gaze the chat pod here. And if you have any questions, please, by all means, go ahead and type them into the chat pod. Looks clear for now, but again, just go ahead and keep typing them in the chat pod as we go along. So next, I want to get into the actual meat of the course. And these are the things that are recommendations. These are enhancements, things that we can try to do to design and operate roadways for the aging population. And these come from that FHWA handbook. Chapter 2 of the handbook is the largest chapter. It contains the most recommendations, and they are intersection related. Intersections are particularly challenging for aging users. So we're going to describe why and list some potential strategies. Well, the why, and this holds true for any driver. Intersections can be complicated places where we have to make a lot of judgments about speed, judgments about gaps. And so safely navigating intersections requires rapid decisions, quick reactions, judgments that we have to make. And these abilities can diminish with age, and we see this statistically. So even though intersections represent about half of our overall fatalities, or a good chunk of our fatalities for all age groups, but about 37% of traffic fatalities for people age 65 and above occur at intersections, compared to 18% for the younger age group. So older drivers are significantly overrepresented at intersections in terms of the fatality numbers. And similarly for pedestrian fatalities at intersections, we see an overrepresentation for the older demographic. So the things that we can do about that, well, I'm going to subdivide the recommendations into 4 categories. Design related, so these are things that maybe we would account for as part of a project. So if we have an opportunity to improve an intersection geometrically, or if we're building a new intersection, or this can also include things like putting in new facilities that accommodate new development. So if a new shopping center comes in, these are examples of things that maybe we can build on the front end. Then signs, markings, and lighting. So lower cost strategies, things that we can do on existing facilities that are easier to implement, lower cost. Traffic signals, because signalized intersections are particularly a challenge. And then lastly, things that are focused on pedestrian safety. So I'm going to start with design, and under the design category, roundabouts. We'll talk about why roundabouts are particularly advantageous for aging users. Our options for innovative designs, what we call the reduced left turn conflict intersections. They're basically some of the innovative designs, like restricted crossing U-turns, J-turns. You may hear them referred to by different names, but they have a similar advantage in that they try to reduce the severe conflict points at an intersection. We'll talk about skewed intersections and some of the challenges and what we can try to do to mitigate that. If we're designing an intersection, one of the key geometric features that is all about trade-offs is the curb radius. So certainly we need to accommodate the turning needs of larger vehicles, but we need to do so in balance with controlling the speeds of turning vehicles and also reducing the crossing distances for pedestrians at the intersection. So it's a classic trade-off. And we'll talk about channelization at the intersections and intersection site distance. So that's a preview of what we're going to cover under the geometrics. And these are all strategies that are included in the FHWA handbook. So let's start with roundabouts. So roundabouts are a proven intersection safety strategy. They eliminate those left turn angle collisions. If you think about a roundabout, it's like a right in, right out only intersection. That's not really a right turn, but it's kind of like a right turn when you're entering the circulatory roadway. So we hope traffic slows down. You only have traffic coming at you in one direction, right? The traffic's coming at you from the left in the circulating roadway. It's easier to make a judgment in a gap at a roundabout. And when you do enter, it's like making a right in to the circulatory roadway. And then you go around, and then when you leave the roundabout, no matter what direction you're heading, it's really a right turn to get out of the circulatory roadway. So just like a right in, right out only driveway is safer than an open driveway where you can make all the directional movements, the roundabout is like a giant right in, right out only intersection. And that helps contribute to the safety. It eliminates the problem with permissive left turns, where we have to judge for gaps in oncoming traffic. We know that's particularly problematic. Roundabouts take that away. Roundabouts are generally lower speed operating environments. makes it easier to judge for gaps and the relative speed of cars. And then even when a crash does occur, because vehicular speeds are generally lower, the severity of those crashes is greatly reduced. So worst case scenario, even if someone totally blows through the yield sign, and hopefully the splitter island has slowed them down, but even if they don't slow down, so even if they totally blow through a yield sign, failure to yield, don't slow down, if you think about the angle of collision at a roundabout, instead of a T-bone 90-degree collision, like someone running a red light and hitting someone at 90 degrees where we're weakest. If you think about vehicle protection, we actually have the most vehicle protection in a head-on collision. And of course, that's where we also need it the most, because if you have two cars traveling at speeds, when they hit head-on, there's a lot of kinetic energy. But we can dissipate that kinetic energy with the crumple zone, the front of the car, where we actually have the least amount of vehicular protection is on our side doors, whether you're a driver side door, passenger side door, and that 90-degree T-bone collision is where we're actually the most vulnerable, or we get the least protection from our vehicle. At a roundabout, a collision between two cars, someone entering, someone circulating, is less likely to be 90 degrees. It's likely to be more shallow, almost like a 40-degree angle of impact. That is a much less intense collision. So just the geometry of the roundabout, if nothing else, helps give us a little added layer of protection. It falls nicely under that safe system approach concept. So for all of these reasons, we typically see that when crashes occur at roundabouts, they tend to be less severe. They tend to be more survivable. So roundabouts definitely have a great advantage. It's really an increased advantage for older users, including older pedestrians, because as a pedestrian crossing a roundabout, the splitter island basically serves to break up the crossing. It's a pedestrian refuge area, basically. So pedestrians only cross one direction of traffic at a time. That splitter island shortens the exposure, shortens the actual time that a pedestrian is exposed in a vehicular lane. And so there are pedestrian benefits as well, including the reduced speed. So lower vehicular speeds greatly contributes to the survivability of a crash, but also it contributes to the likelihood that drivers are going to see a pedestrian and stop for a pedestrian, because sometimes one of the issues that we see at signalized intersections or mid-block crossings in particular is that at higher speeds, drivers have less time to perceive, to react, and less likely to yield or stop for a pedestrian. Slower speeds, yielding rates go up. The ability to perceive the pedestrian goes up. So for all of these reasons, roundabouts can be great opportunities. If we have skewed intersections, if we have more than 4 legs, more than 4 streets coming in, roundabouts are a great opportunity. And so I mentioned how our neck turning ability can diminish as we age. At skewed intersections or awkward intersections with multiple legs, say with stop control, the driver may have to make these awkward look back angles to see traffic. At a roundabout, that can become greatly simplified. So skewed multi-leg intersections, oftentimes great candidates for a roundabout. Now, there is something in the FHWA handbook that warrants some discussion, and that is the difference between a single lane roundabout, one entry lane, one exiting lane, one circulating lane, and a multi-lane roundabout where we have more than one lane coming in, more than one lane circulating, and multi-lane exits. So the handbook recommends that the roundabout installations be limited to one lane. And there are issues or there are potential conflicts that we have with multi-lane roundabouts that we don't have with single lane roundabouts. So no doubt a single lane roundabout has better safety performance overall, typically, than a multi-lane roundabout. So why? What's the challenge as soon as we go with 2 lanes, or sometimes we have 3-lane roundabouts? Well, there are some issues. There are some conflicts. There are some challenges that we have with multi-lane roundabouts that we don't have with single lane roundabouts. One is the failure to yield to both lanes. So if we have a 2-lane entry into a roundabout, and good example here illustrated on this figure. So you see the red car. There's a yellow car and a red car that are trying to enter the roundabout, and you see the green car in the circulatory roadway, the left lane of the circulatory roadway. What is sometimes very common is that failure to yield by the vehicle in the right lane entering. And you see that collision there between the green car and the red car. So the rules of the roundabout are such that we have to yield to all lanes, or yield to both lanes, because that green car may be making that that maneuver where they're leaving the circulatory roadway, and they're able to do so. The way the roundabout or many roundabouts are set up is that maybe we do have 2 through lanes. We have choices in lane allocation. You can have a left turn only lane at an entrance, but many times we carry 2 through lanes through a roundabout. So that's the case here. You can see that in the striping of the roundabout. So that green vehicle that is exiting or leaving the roundabout is legally able to do so. They're not in the wrong lane. The problem is that driver of the red car is not yielding to both lanes in the circulatory roadway. If we only have 1 lane, that it's not an issue, but we see this commonly with 2-lane, multi-lane roundabouts. Failure to yield to the second lane. Fairly common safety problem. The good news is when those crashes do occur, they tend to be less severe because of the lower speeds and also that lower angle of collision. But that is something that does happen. Another type of crash that can occur at a multi-lane roundabout that doesn't occur at single lane is someone making an improper movement from the lane. So in this example, both lanes are through. If you want to make a right turn, you could get in the right lane to make the right turn movement. Both lanes go through. To make a left turn, should be in the left lane. A multi-lane roundabout, drivers should not be changing lanes in the circulatory roadway. You basically select a lane on the entry, and you enter the roundabout in that lane, and you stay in that lane and exit from that lane. There shouldn't be lane changing in the circulatory roadway of a modern roundabout. But yet we do see this happen, where say a driver, that red line that you see, that driver is making a left turn essentially from the right lane, even though the markings, the lane assignment signs try to clearly indicate to make that maneuver, to make that left turn, basically get in the left lane, enter the roundabout in that lane, stay in that lane, exit from that lane. But yet we do see improper left turns or improper movements from that right lane. And this doesn't happen at single lane roundabouts because you only have 1 choice, but it is something that happens at multi-laners. Now, the good news is something like a hybrid, a 1 lane by 2 lane roundabout does have a much better safety performance. So if we can reduce the number of lanes, at least on 2 of the approaches, and maybe keep it a hybrid type of roundabout, or also utilizing that spiral type of design, it makes it more intuitive, or it makes it more clear what lane motorists should be in to reach their destination. So it's really the multi-lane roundabouts that are beyond a 2x1 scenario here. So yeah, if we can keep it at a single lane roundabout, great. That has the fewest potential conflicts. This is kind of like the next best thing if you happen to have a major roadway that requires that added capacity. But when we get to the full 2x2 or a 3x3 lane roundabout, we do start to see things happening. But it's important to kind of understand what that is. So generally, that's why there's that preference for a single lane roundabout. If we, and of course, the reason we go to multi-lane roundabouts is for capacity, obviously. But if we don't need that capacity right away, another strategy is to implement a single lane roundabout at first that has the capability for expansion if and when we need that added capacity. So enjoying the safety benefits of a single lane roundabout if we can. So as you can tell, I'm a big advocate for roundabouts, a great safety treatment. Another great safety treatment is the reduced left turn conflict intersections. It's kind of a family of various intersection types. You may have heard them referred to as R-cuts, restricted crossing U-turn intersections. Georgia in recent years has really increased the number of R-cut intersections, especially in rural areas, the 4-lane divided highways with minor roads coming in. Rather than have a open median intersection, basically making the minor street, the minor road traffic, make a right turn, go downstream, make a U-turn, and then come back. It eliminates that far side angle collision. So R-cuts, they're also called J-turns in some states. Like if you go to Missouri, they'll call them J-turns. Here in Georgia, we call them R-cuts. Florida calls them R-cuts, but the concept is the same. It's basically using U-turn based redirection of traffic to eliminate certain severe conflict points. It's these far side angle collisions that are always seem to be the problem at these rural divided highways. So the major road isn't stopped. The major road is not signal controlled. If we have a stop sign at the minor road, and as drivers, we do a pretty good job of judging for gaps on the near side, traffic coming at us from the left on the near side. What we have difficulty with is judging on that far side. So even if the median is open, in other words, no trees, no landscaping, and even if we're not on a curve, even if it's flat, so the best case scenario, it's flat, it's straight. And we can see traffic coming at us from the far side. We still have difficulty judging those gaps. And so inevitably, it's these far side angle collisions that are usually the biggest problem we have on divided 4-lane roadways. That's where this restricted crossing U-turn or J-turn intersection comes into play. Traffic coming from the minor street can only turn right. If they didn't want to go right, if they wanted to make the crossing maneuver, or if they wanted to make a left turn, they do so by going down the major highway, utilizing a U-turn bay, make a U-turn to come back, and either continue or go down the crossroad. So even though we are adding, say, a conflict point or a potential collision area at that U-turn location, we are essentially breaking up or separating the decision points. And so even with that potential of, oh yeah, someone could get into a collision making that U-turn maneuver, but even considering that, the safety benefits of the R-cut are enormous, statistically almost as good as a roundabout, a single lane roundabout. So we're seeing more and more restricted crossing U-turns, especially in Georgia. If you drive around our state, I think we're over 100 of these already just in Georgia. So getting and more on the way. So to learn more on the restricted crossing U-turn or median U-turn, which is a signalized version, the restricted crossing U-turn can also be signalized, but the median U-turn allows the through movement on the minor street, so slightly different, but the Federal Highway Administration has a series of informational guides on these innovative intersection designs. Skew angle. So when I talk about skew, a traditional intersection has that 90-degree angle, and then that's desirable. But what happens if we get into something like this? And skew typically becomes more problematic at less than 75 degrees. And it has challenges in terms of the look back angle, the need for us to turn our necks to judge for a gap in traffic, but it can also do things like increase the crossing distance for a pedestrian. So here you see an example of a skewed roadway, but we've made a mitigation to kind of angle it at least at the very end there to reduce the stop bar, the crossing length condition, but also the look back angle from the stop bar. So the intersection skew angle directly influences the head turn angle. And research indicates that when I have skew angles that are less than that 75 degrees, that's when it starts to become problematic. That's when the head turning angle gets above 140 degrees, and that's where it becomes problematic. So what are some things that we could do other than rebuild the intersection? Well, maybe things like prohibit a right turn on red. So just to make it easier by not having that scenario. So take away that right turn on red altogether and eliminate that look back need. The intersection skew can increase the difficulty for steering. It basically makes it a lot harder for us to keep our vehicle in the proper path. It can become really challenging if I have dual left turn lanes. But even with just a single left turn lane, it can be challenging to make that turn and stay in the lane. The handbook actually makes a recommendation to increase the throat width, the receiving throat width of the lane. And maybe it could be like a shoulder that just provides extra space if we need to for that potential off tracking. Curb radius, another geometric feature. This is the classic trade-off between accommodating the needs of a larger vehicle like a truck, but yet keeping the distance, the crossing distance for pedestrians less, and also reducing speeds of turning vehicles. And a little difference makes a big difference. A little difference in the radius makes a big difference in terms of what the speed is that a vehicle can make that right turn, and also a big difference in terms of the crossing length that we would have at the intersection. So there are things that agencies are doing, very sophisticated things like three-centered curves or compound curves, mountable curbing, perhaps, all things that try to make this balance. It seems like a simple thing, but it's actually a interesting engineering challenge in urban environments. And while we're making these decisions and these trade-offs, we need to consider what is the effective turning radius versus the actual curb radius, because they're different in many situations. If we have on-street parking, if we have bicycle lanes, common in the urban setting, and in the urban setting is where we typically need the slower turning speeds, where we're more concerned about not having longer pedestrian crossing distances. Well, we can maintain a sharp curb radius, but yet still have that ability to accommodate the turning needs of larger vehicles, because the bike lanes, the on-street parking actually helps us with the effective turning radius. So when we're laying out an intersection and when we're applying our turning templates for vehicles, it's really fitting within the effective turning radius. And sometimes we can still accommodate a slower turning speed for cars and accommodate the turning needs for larger vehicles. So a lot of these are details and some great references have evolved in recent years. There's a lot of great urban street design guidelines that are now available. NACTO is a great example of an organization that has provided great urban street design features. And then so some things that have changed are how we design things like right turn lanes, pedestrian refuge islands that are part of right turn channelization. The real point is to try to slow traffic down, make place the pedestrian in an area that's visible. And so even though we often see diagrams of perfect world scenarios, we are often challenged with real world scenarios. But there are things that we can do to try to balance these needs for slowing, keeping good sight lines, and also reducing neck turning requirements for aging drivers. So sometimes we see retrofits of some of the older right turn channelization designs. And it doesn't necessarily even have to involve construction. Here's a good example of something that was done with just pavement markings, with just paint to actually facilitate that slower, more visible type of right turn. So I mentioned that there's a lot of new guidance out there. So I want to put in a plug for this document. It's available for free. It's available online. It's the design guidance for channelized right turn lanes, and really captures kind of the state of the art, state of the practice for right turn channelization. But it is an art as much as it is a science, providing good pedestrian pathways, so being accessible, so seeing the truncated domes there for visually impaired pedestrians, but also these cut-throughs that can help orient a pedestrian, especially a visually impaired pedestrian at an intersection. So right turn channelization can actually become a very challenging aspect of intersection design, and one that we want to get right the first time, because you don't want to have to go back and retrofit these islands if we can avoid it. So another feature that is in the handbook is a right turn acceleration lanes, and this is primarily going to be in a rural type of setting where pedestrians where we probably wouldn't have sidewalks and wouldn't expect a lot of pedestrian activity, because a right turn acceleration lane is generally a higher speed type of provision. But from an older or aging driver standpoint, especially where we have a skew, is this opportunity to use a right turn acceleration lane so that a driver really doesn't have to look back. They have a lane in front of them to enter into, and then they can use their side view mirrors to judge for a gap in traffic. And it's more like a merge operation onto the highway. So here's a North Carolina example. These are typically going to be rural, where we don't have pedestrian activity, but that is something else that is covered in the FHWA handbook. And while we're on channelization, the handbook does talk about the median, and when a raised median is preferable over a paved, say a center two-way left turn lane. And this is very consistent with our access management guidelines as well. Generally speaking, when traffic volumes get above that 20,000 vehicles per day level, but it's also a function of how many turning vehicles we have. What is our driveway density? What type of business do we have along the road? Or is it residential? Because if we have residential, that typically means a lot fewer left turns in and out of residential driveways than if they're commercial driveways. So it's more than just the total ADT of the facility. But generally speaking, when we start to exceed 20,000 cars a day, from an access management standpoint, that's also when a raised median and providing for left turn bays is generally going to be a better safety approach. For raised medians, the handbook puts in a recommendation for a sloping curb as opposed to a vertical curb. So if you think of the traditional vertical curb, which we often see, say, in an urban setting where we have on-street parking, because it helps keep a vehicle that's trying to back into a parking space from popping up on the sidewalk, or maybe parking on the sidewalk. But when we're not in a urban context, the low speed urban context with on-street parking, there are oftentimes safety advantages to a sloping curb, especially in a median, a raised median. The sloping curb tends to be more forgiving if a vehicle hits it. So if you think about you're driving along at maybe 40, 45 miles an hour, and you rub up against a vertical curb, it can actually rip the tire off the rim. A sloping curb, generally more forgiving. It generally allows the driver to have better stability if they rub up against it or ride up on it. So for things like a median, a raised median, which is something where if it gets hit, it's going to be a higher speed, or channelization, even a right turn channelization at an intersection. It's more forgiving. So that's where the recommendation for a sloping curb comes into play for when we're dealing with access management or raised medians. So intersection sight distance, the last of our design principles. Basically, the recommendations say that we have certain design values. So if we go to our design manuals, or like the AASHTO Green Book, Policy on Geometric Design, it does make recommendations for these gap values for intersection sight distance. And these are the design values that we try to provide clear intersection sight distance triangles for. But we know that in the real world, we have many intersections where we don't have these actual clear sight triangles available to us. And so the rule of thumb is try to do what you can. If you don't necessarily get the design value, can you at least get closer to it? And so I make reference to this great research that came out recently from the Minnesota DOT. And it's specific to rural stop controlled intersections where the design value for sight distance may be very high because we're dealing with higher speeds. And in some cases, what is actually out there may be different than what we would say is our design value. But what this MnDOT research found is that if we can get at least 1,000 feet of sight distance at these rural stop controlled intersections, it has a significant improvement. So if you think about it, maybe a breaking point for, all right, if I can't get my full sight triangle, what is the sight triangle that I really should try to get? And this is where we may have to make tough decisions about clearing trees that may be out there existing, or maybe even having conversations with property owners. Maybe we don't even have the right of way for the full sight triangle, but maybe we could talk to the property owner and have them voluntarily remove something that's an obstruction. So in rural areas, good rule of thumb, try to get at least 1,000 feet of that sight distance. So here's an example. The white shaded area is our design value for say intersection sight distance at a stop controlled intersection. But if we only have a certain amount available, well, what the amount available, maybe do a check and see, and speed is also a big part of this. So 1,000 feet in a rural area, it's generally because of the higher speed. Maybe less than 1,000 feet is all we need for a slower speed environment. So it is very much context based. But generally, the rule of thumb is do the best you can with intersection sight distance. Another thing related to intersection sight distance is the left turn lanes and the ability to try to provide an offset, a positive offset. So if you think about a permissive left turn case, whether it's signal or two-way stop control, where we have to judge for a gap in oncoming traffic. And if the left turn lanes are directly opposite one another, a vehicle in that opposite left turn lane could be blocking our view of oncoming traffic. If I can provide a positive offset, I've reduced that. So here's an example of worst case. This is negative offset. That vehicle in the left turn lane opposite me and the vehicles behind them, they're blocking my view. I can't see if a vehicle is coming at me. So this is a permissive left, say a signalized intersection. I can go if it's clear, but whether it's clear, I don't know. By the time I could see that vehicle coming at me, they may be coming at me very quickly. So this is negative offset at left turn lanes. Worst case scenario, I can't see behind that left turning vehicle opposite me. If I provide positive offset, I can see around those vehicles on the left. So whenever we do have permissive left turn scenarios, it's highly desirable to try to get a positive offset. And it depends upon whether there's the likelihood of a truck on the opposite left side or passenger cars. If I have a lot of truck traffic also turning left, I want a little more of that positive offset. So this is guidance that comes right out of the FHWA handbook on what to provide. And while we're talking about offset, positive offset, it's not just left turn lanes, it's also right turn lanes. So here's an example, and this would be in a rural setting. A positive offset for a right turn lane basically gives, well, it gives assurance that first that a vehicle is actually going to be turning right. But it also provides better sight distance so that drivers coming out of the minor leg of this rural intersection can get better ability to judge gaps in traffic. So here's an example of a positive offset right turn lane, a Kentucky example. You can also see when we do provide positive offset right turn lanes, it can also give us the opportunity to move the stop bar. So you can kind of see the what's eradicated there, but let's say we could move that up further, better giving us an improved sight distance triangle. So positive offset right turn lanes, also a good scenario. So the next category or the next section of recommendations out of the handbook, deal with signs, markings, lighting, and we'll get to that. But this is a good opportunity, I think, to take a pause. Let me check the chat pod here. Thank you. Some good links in there to these publications. Not seeing any additional questions in the chat pod. Let me stop sharing here, and Lila, I'm not sure if people have the opportunity to unmute, but if you do, if you have a question and you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question, let's take a pause here and see if we have any questions up to this point. All right, hearing none, or someone wants to.
Mark, I do not have the ability to allow attendees to unmute.
Gotcha. Thank you, Lila. So we're going to rely on the chat pod then, but not seeing any questions in the chat pod at this point. Or what people do have is the opportunity to raise their hand. Like I just raised my hand, but if you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature and then maybe type it in the chat pod.
We do have a couple of questions now. Yeah,
thanks, Phil. So curious about the 1,000 feet being a lot larger than the GDOT ISD value. So the intersection sight distance value, that 1,000 feet, Phil, that it's not really a design guide necessarily out of MnDOT. What it basically found is that if you're looking for kind of that rule of thumb cutoff, going up to that 1,000 feet is kind of where that they saw the benefit. In other words, once they get beyond that 1,000 feet of intersection sight distance, they saw diminishing safety benefits. But if they had less than 1,000 feet and they could get 1,000 feet, that's where the greatest, say, cost benefit opportunity came into play. But you're right, sometimes we can't even get that much. Sometimes we can't even get that much. We don't have a magic answer on what at what point of diminished intersection sight distance does something become a problem. Obviously the volumes of traffic play a big role, but I just thought that was pretty interesting with the MnDOT study that found that. Question from Amy on, is there any safety studies for how auxiliary turn lanes help older drivers? Great question, Amy. So the whole concept of the trade-offs between right turn lanes and left turn lanes, it's continuing to be challenged and debated and discussed, both in the urban context and the rural context. Obviously urban context, a lot of trade-offs, pedestrian safety, bicyclist safety, and all that. But what's interesting is in the rural areas as well. And so I'm going to hold off on expressing what at this point would be opinion, because I'm going to say that we have research that is actively underway. And so I'm gonna withhold my opinion because a lot of times my opinions are proven wrong. But all I can say, Amy, is stay tuned. We are learning a lot. We're emerging in our thinking, and I guess just as a hint or a tip off, it may be different than what we have conventionally thought, or how we have conventionally thought about the benefits of turn lanes. So yeah, and no, nothing specific, at least that I have or know of, with aging drivers. It's more of the global safety issue of the trade-offs of right turn lanes and left turn lanes. But great question. And maybe at some point in the future, we may even have a training class on the latest and greatest that our knowledge is advanced for turn lanes. Good.
I have a point here, Mark, and that is that there are ongoing studies that are called naturalistic driving studies. One of the biggest ones is the Long Road study, which has been following, I think it's 1,900 and some older drivers. They have instrumentation in their car, they have regular checkups, they have medication reviews, and they're just watching to see what happens. And so when one of those drivers does get in a crash, they have a ton of data, not just what would normally be in the crash report, but information about the driver and their driver habits and so on and so forth. And I expect we're going to see a lot of results from that feed into this engineering situation.
That's great news, Lila. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the naturalistic driving studies, where we do actually have video footage, and we can monitor where a driver's eyes go in different scenarios. All of that is amazingly helpful in increasing our understanding of the human factors. And I'm delighted to hear that we're starting to focus more attention on the older users in particular. You're right, Lila, that's going to be a huge help for us in the engineering practitioner community. Great. And Tom, great comment, and glad this is helpful. And yeah, good. I'm glad you got several intersection treatments that already come to mind, because we've got more to come. We still have some more recommendations with intersections, but then we're also going to get into interchanges and roadway segments. So it's just right before 11:30. So I think we're at a great point to take a break. So we're going to keep the room open. So you don't have to log out, or you can log out, but I think you can log back in if you do have to leave the room for some reason. But right at 1:30, and again, we're going to go from 1:30 to 3 o'clock for the afternoon portion. But right at 1:30, we will reconvene and finish up with intersections, and then get into interchanges and roadway segments. So with that, we'll take a pause and have a lunch break, and again, we'll start right back up at 1:30. So thank you, everybody. And if we have more questions that you think of during the lunch break, by all means, feel free to type them into the chat pod. We'll get to them as soon as we come back. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from your lunch break on our engineer workshop day, road design workshop led by Mr. Mark Doctor. I'll be doing an afternoon session, and I just want to take a few minutes to introduce myself and welcome you. My name is Elizabeth Head. I'm the Deputy Director for Injury Prevention here at Department of Public Health. This project and grant I managed for a number of years, and now have moved on to managing all of our healthy aging work that we do in injury prevention. So this particular workshop is very near and dear to my heart. I've learned something every single year, even though I'm not an engineer. So very grateful for Mark Doctor and him always taking the time with us. I'm also really excited and grateful that there's so many attendees today. Really appreciate seeing y'all and having you take the time out of your schedules to be with us here virtually as we talk about designing roadways in a way that's safe across the lifespan. I want to take a few moments and talk about promoting driving longevity. In essence, everything that we do as a program, as well as what you do on the engineering side of things, helps to promote driving longevity for as long as it's safe. So I'm going to take about 15-20 minutes and chat with you about those things. I would like you very much to participate in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat. Any questions that you have, whether you see it in my slides or not, please feel free to ask them. I'm here to help you as you figure out the things you need to do in designing the roadway. So first, I want to introduce our older driver safety program. We now call it the 55 plus driver safety program. And the reason we do that is because when we looked at the data in Georgia, we realized that hospitalizations and deaths actually begin to rise at the age of 55, as opposed to the traditional older, which is generally categorized as 65 plus. So we see the 55 years of age to 64 years of age, that age range being prime for prevention, a great discussion because they are usually caregivers for folks that are over 65. And they're also seeing a manifestation of chronic conditions in their life as they begin that sort of aging process, and they need to manage those to stay as healthy as possible once they get to that over the age of 65. The overall goal of the 55 plus driver safety program is to reduce injuries and fatalities. But we also want to do that and enhance mobility options for our aging population. And of course, the goal for all of us, no matter what it is that we're doing in this big puzzle, is to make Georgia's roadways safe for all users. We are funded by Governor's Office of Highway Safety. This particular program has been funded since 2008. We're very thankful for that funding and the ability to grow this program into what it is today. We're going to talk a little bit about what it means to age, talk about the data, which will help address some common misconceptions about the aging population. And then the latter half of this presentation is really about the meaning of driving and some tools to promote safety and mobility. We will be sending this slide deck out as a PDF so that you have access to the websites that I share, because they're really powerful tools. If any of you are a caregiver, if any of you have family members that are aging or just aren't good drivers, no matter what their age is, there's generally some reasons for that. And some of these resources can help you and your loved one figure that out and make a plan. So what does it mean to age? There are some folks that get to the age of 85 and are healthier than any of us could imagine ourselves to be. And there are some folks that are at 55 years of age are really struggling physically, cognitively, emotionally, or all of those. And so it's important that we understand that subjective nature as we think about our program, about road design, about implementing safety practices, and of course about promoting driving longevity. There are, of course, some physical, visual, and cognitive changes that I'll go over in a moment. But really, at the end of the day, we've got to figure out how to balance independence and mobility with safety. Maybe mobility is no longer driving a car. Maybe mobility is having safe sidewalks, or having sidewalks at all that you can use, and having good crosswalks, creating those environmental changes that allow for folks to be mobile in other ways besides behind the wheel of a car. So you'll see in front of you on this slide a table. It addresses two pieces. One, normal aging happens to all of us, and then two, the introduction of disease processes, which further decline some of our common things. So mobility is something we all want to do. It relates specifically to how we are doing physically, vision, and of course, cognition. In terms of vision, all sorts of things may decline as we age. There's a great study out of California that states if you have not seen visual decline by the age of 70, that is when you're most likely to see it. If you don't see it then, any changes to your vision are going to be minimal. So that's something to look forward to for folks that have great vision. I do not have great vision. So things that we all have to be worried about are that introduction of disease processes, which further reduce our abilities, and self-awareness of that, learning things that can help us overcome those issues, and finally making a plan and actually taking charge and deciding when you may or may not want to drive anymore is a big piece of our program. So the slide that you see in front of you now is a table that looks at motor vehicle crash mortality rates in Georgia from 2013 to 2017. So your rate per 100,000 drivers is from the ages of 0 to 54 is 12.4. As I said previously, you see a pretty big jump when you hit that 55 to 64 age range. You jump up to a rate of 16.3 per 100,000 drivers. And then when you get to the age of over 65, it does jump again. Not as big of a jump, but there is a jump. And so we monitor this and look at it. When you think of older drivers, most folks think, yeah, of course, an older driver, they're going to be more likely to die in a car crash. And this supports that. What is not supported is this theory that older drivers actually are in more crashes. The reality is that they're not. They have fewer crashes for a multitude of reasons. In an in-depth discussion, we could go on and talk about why those reasons are. Feel free to put that in the chat if you're inclined. But largely, folks over the age of 55 and into 60s and 70s, they self-regulate. They don't drive at night anymore. I know my parents are now eating dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon. That's their dinner time, and they're in bed by 8:30. And that happens as we age. They are more likely to wear their seatbelts. They are less likely to speed. And generally speaking, if they were a good driver at the age of 30 and they reach the age of 80 with no significant physical or cognitive decline, you've got a driver there with 50 years of experience. So it shouldn't be too surprising that they're involved in fewer crashes. We used to be able to say that they're on the road less. That's actually only true for our 85 plus population. It's really not true from 65 to 84. Those folks were working longer, living longer, enjoying our life, and going out and doing recreational things for a longer period of time. So to see this hold true for so long is actually really interesting and speaks to the safety of this population. I do want to talk to you all about the citations issued for drivers over the age of 65. What you see in front of you are following too closely, a couple of failure to yields, weaving, and failure to stop. This helps us with program planning. It helps us what messages to focus on when we're talking to a group of drivers over the age of 65. What is also important to note is that these exact same things you see in citations for other age groups, just in a different order. So everybody gets pulled over for mostly the same things. Just what's happening is in each age group allows us to help target our messaging. Now I want to switch gears and talk about keys over a lifetime. I want you to think to the age in which you got your first set of keys. Feel free to put it in the chat. I know that I was about 16 when I got my license. I was 15 when I got my permit. Thank you for that. So I'm seeing 16. Generally speaking, we see an age range of anywhere from 14, if you lived in like a farming community and you're talking on that tractor or what have you, to 21 if you live in a big city. Some folks just don't get their licenses right away. They wait for a while. Really appreciate everyone saying some things in the chat. That's helpful. What I would argue is that you actually got your first set of keys as a toddler. As a baby even. And that is important to note because when we got those keys as little ones, we were excited because we were like mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, other loved ones, and we were ready to grow up. Everyone talks about being, 4 going on 14. And yeah, absolutely. So we got that first set of keys and we felt really grown up and we were clearly going to drive a car any day now. But then you got your first set of real keys. I absolutely had a Batman keychain with my first set of keys. And so what I also want to hear in the chat is what did getting that first set of keys mean to you? What does having your first set of car keys where you're driving a car mean? For me, it meant independence. It meant I could go anywhere I wanted anytime, which my mother quickly squashed. It means freedom. It means responsibility. It means the next phase of your life, right? So think now, past car keys, what other keys do you receive over your lifetime that have a meaning? Your first office, your first house, absolutely, or first apartment, your first recreational vehicle, when you get promoted at work, maybe you're trusted with a set of keys from somebody, a family member or a business partner. So keys across our lifetime really mean something to us. And where I'm going with this is the understanding that at some point in time, after a literal lifetime of interactions with keys and keys meaning things and symbolizing where we're at in our life, we suddenly get to this piece where someone says, well, Mom, you're like 75 now. I feel like you shouldn't be driving anymore. And so that really creates some psychological and emotional problems for a person. When you take away the keys, there is loneliness. There is depression, and frankly, there's boredom. And if we think through the pandemic that we've all experienced and still are experiencing, you see a lot of isolation issues. And with isolation, particularly in an older adult, you then begin to see physical symptoms and their health takes a nosedive. And that is a thing that we want to prevent. It's really important. So understanding what it means to drive and those emotions are a really critical piece of breaking down tough conversations, because we have to eventually have a conversation about what we're going to do if we can't drive anymore. In a classroom, I would ask the group, how old is too old to drive? Typically, and you feel free to put it in the chat now if you'd like. So at what age should you no longer be driving your car? I agree, Marisha. It does depend. In a classroom full of older drivers, you've got the 90-year-olds looking at each other when they're spouses and saying, well, you should have stopped driving 10 years ago. It actually doesn't matter if you're 40 or 80. Exactly. The person who shouldn't be driving is usually about 10 years older than you. And that uncle that's still driving at 90, a person at 101, still a good driver. It really speaks to this concept of the subjective nature of aging. And so understanding that helps us understand breaking down and observing driving skills. If someone's a good driver, there's a reason for that. There's no reason to take away their keys because they're at a certain age. But what we do want to do is we want to have a planning of what's going to happen. Anybody that's retired and is older, they made a plan for retirement. They took steps to get financial security to retire. Conversely, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we all take umbrellas with us because we are sure it is not going to rain. While that one may not be as true, we've made a plan for a situation. And in this case, planning and having this discussion and allowing a person to be in charge of what would happen if they couldn't drive or felt that they were unsafe, what steps could they take, is really critically important, both to driving longevity and to overall mobility and independence of someone. We really have to take those things under advisement. And this just talks about being lonely and depressed and bored. This is why it's so important to plan for mobility. So the rest of these slides really talk a little bit about a bunch of different resources. And so I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. To begin having this conversation, you actually don't want to start with, we should talk about when you can't drive. I don't know about your households, but that is the quickest way for my mother to say, oh, we're not having this conversation. So we do start by talking about, how do we find the safest car? How do we get an insurance discount? Well, we can go to Consumer Reports or My Car Does What, and we can read our owner's manual, and we can take a defensive driver's course, and all of these websites are here for you. Having that conversation is really critical. In addition, we can look at free Hartford Foundation publications on aging and driving. We can participate in an older driver safety age lab, which is really cool. And then we can also pay attention to things that we can do ourselves, particularly medication management. There are a lot of folks taking a lot of medications that could potentially interact with one another and cause them to be unsafe behind the wheel of a car. And a simple medication change or adjustment to when they take it and or an adjustment to dosage could make them safe to drive again. So none of that is part of as a natural part of aging. It's a product of something that you're doing, your medication in this case. Roadwise RX, so you see the website in front of you, roadwiserx.com, does not collect any personal information, allows you to put in medications, whether they're prescription or over-the-counter or an herbal supplement, and it then creates a table for you that lists potential interactions between different medications if they're on their list, as well as how it could make you feel when you're driving and what to watch out for. This is a really powerful and free tool that you can use for you or your family members. Another tool is a self-rating tool. Yeah, absolutely. We love the AARP online videos about vehicle safety. They are so to the point and such an easy resource to get to in these digital days. Thank you for that, Mark. This is a driver self-rating tool. It was developed actually by AAA Foundation. We modified this a bit, not the content, but the contrast and the font, so it's more readable. You're probably squinting right now. I know I am, and I know what it says. This is available free. Again, you can go to, let me go to this website. You can go to AAA.com and look up self-rating tool, and it will be right there on that website for you. In Georgia, we do a program called CarFit. It is a 12-point checklist that assesses your ergonomic fit in your vehicle. Not an assessment, but it is a fantastic way to say, hey, let's see how we're fitting in our car. Let's make sure we don't have big blind spots in our mirrors. Go with your loved one, participate in a car fit, and then suddenly you're already talking about this topic of safety in the vehicle. That is an opening to have that very difficult conversation. In addition, we have a communication tool called Yellow Dot. We use Yellow Dot to provide critical medical information if a driver is in a car crash or has a medical issue and cannot speak for themselves. Included in the kit is a decal that goes in two places, because you would have two kits, one in your car, one in your home, and then a Yellow Dot folder. So this is a really great for communicating information if you're out on the road and you have some sort of issue. And so to be as safe as possible on the road, we encourage people to participate in this program. We want to make sure that we can assess our own safety and sharpen our skills. Seeing a certified driving rehabilitation specialist, it's literally in the name of their profession. Their job is to rehabilitate a driver if it's possible, and to give you different options if it's not. So that is a really phenomenal program. So making a plan. We've talked quickly, and I apologize for that, but we've talked quickly about what it means to have keys. We've talked about ways to help a person and to ease into that conversation, and to talk about having a plan. If we have a plan, we can take action on it. Making a plan doesn't mean it's going to happen. It means that you're prepared, and it gives our older adults or folks over 65 a way to control a situation that they may one day not have control of. So they get to make a decision. Hartford Foundation has this really amazing worksheet that says, if these things happen, I will stop driving. Or if these things happen, I will restrict my driving to, and then you can fill in the blank. Those guides are really what help you make a plan and decide about mobility. Here are some conversation starters. Some of these would work on my parents. Some of them would not. Everything is very subjective. So, but having the conversation, just beginning, is really, really important. In Georgia, and actually in every state in the country, we have what are called area agencies on aging. In Georgia, we have 12. Also in Georgia, you can go to Empower Line, this 404 number. You can call anywhere in Georgia and it will connect you to the correct area agency on aging. How you get connected to your area agencies on aging in your particular state may differ a little bit, but every single state in the country has area agencies on aging. Some have 4, some have more than 12. It just depends on how they've divided themselves up. I cannot overstate how important this resource is to us as professionals, to local programs, nonprofits, and to members of our community in terms of access to all sorts of specializations and experts. They're just a really phenomenal resource. In Georgia, we have our Department of Driver Services. In other states, it's called DMV or BMV, all sorts of acronyms across the country. It's driver services. Renewals happen, mobility resources, other transportation options, and the medical revocation process, which I won't get into today, but we're happy to always have a discussion about what that process looks like in Georgia, and discuss how it could happen in other states as well. Although medical revocation does happen in the majority of states in the country. That's what I have for today. I really appreciate y'all's time, allowing me to be here and talk with all of you. Janet, I would love for you to implement it in Texas. We really love Yellow Dot in this state. Did anyone have any questions for me?
If you have questions for Elizabeth, please type them in the chat pod, because I don't think folks can unmute at this point. But Elizabeth, I want to say thank you. That was a great presentation. Yeah, I've heard you give similar versions of that presentation before, but I keep learning something every time I hear it. And you know, I'm about to graduate into that 55 community, and just it resonates, and something that stuck with me. Because when we kicked off the workshop today, you know, we kind of talked about that notion of older drivers tend to be safer in terms of less aggressive, but sadly, we are overrepresented statistically, and part of it is the inability to absorb the same kinetic energy in a collision
Exactly.
as a younger person. But what I really liked hearing in your presentation today, that I think is a little different wrinkle, is the notion of planning. And you know, as a like for myself, as someone getting into that mid-50s realm, you know, retirement is now not that distant concept that it used to be. And I gave the statistic about how we are an aging population. So here's something I'd like our participants to think about, because now, depending upon what agency you work for, you know, whether you're a local government, the state DOT, private sector, whatever section of transportation you work in, you know, the issue of accommodating for the aging population, you know, not only is it great in terms of trying to be proactive in terms of safety, but it also makes good economic sense. As people plan where they want to retire, as people plan where they want to live, having mobility options, living in places where you have choices, and whether that be a walkable community, some people like the golf cart communities, whatever it is, options are important. And so a strong community, and that includes strength economically, I think is one that is proactive in their considerations for older user mobility and older user safety. And Elizabeth, as we both know, this can also quickly become a political issue because older people tend to vote. and, and so a lot of politicians like to gravitate toward accomplishments maybe that they can take credit for, or they have their agencies take credit for. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to message and market it. But you got me thinking very hard, Elizabeth, about that planning ahead aspect. And you're right. And transportation is a big part of where people might decide to retire. Yeah.
It is. And we're living longer. Chronic conditions are better managed because we know more about them. And so, you know, in order to take advantage of our retirement years, 55 is still young. You're still young. You've got lots of time. But just to be cognizant of that and make that plan so that you can enjoy everything that you've worked so long for. That investment is, I think, is really important. And this is an investment in time and an investment in yourself, which I think we don't do often enough.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, Elizabeth. This was really helpful. I'm checking the chat pod to see if we have other questions. Not seeing anything, but everyone loves the yellow dot program. Yeah, it is a good one.
We're fans.
And Georgia is certainly a leader in that. That was great.
Thank you. It was a pleasure today. Y'all are in good hands for the rest of your afternoon. I actually love the afternoon session. Tricia, let me share my email with you and we can talk offline about what your needs are. I'll put my email in the chat and we are happy to, there it goes, work on anything that we're able to provide.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. And I think Elizabeth's slides and my PowerPoint slides also will be made available to everybody. So we'll get those posted and or emailed out. So again, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everybody. That's great. So let me get back to finishing up on intersections. And actually, let's see. I need, I'm sorry, I need to have my permission to share my screen re-granted, if you don't mind. Let me try that again. There we go. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So before we left for the break, we were talking about intersections and going through the recommendations that are found in the Federal Highway Administration's handbook. And so the ones related to signing, marking, and lighting, I think are pretty straightforward. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. As you might imagine, a lot of these recommendations involve larger signs, larger lettering, increased letter height, making them more conspicuous. And it's essentially the principles that we talked about, giving the older drivers more time to react. So for example, the recommendation to put an advanced street name plaque on the intersection ahead warning signs, it just gives people opportunities to know, oh, okay, this is where I need to make my left turn up ahead, and so gives them more time to perhaps get over into the left lane. So really simple and straightforward, but providing the advanced street name signs or the advanced plaques. And then at the actual intersection itself, recommendation to perhaps go with above minimum letter heights, and some areas even use things like internally illuminated signs. All of these are great enhancements, especially for the aging community. And then other provisions like using supplemental pavement markings, especially for the more critical things like a stop ahead, especially perhaps if that stop sign is maybe not visible. Maybe there's curvature in the roadway, and so things that can help add to the conspicuity that there's a situation up ahead that needs an appropriate reaction, like a stop or a yield. So stop ahead, signal ahead, supplemental pavement markings. And then just drawing upon the conspicuity of the sign itself. This is not a requirement, but it's optional. And many agencies find this as a very effective low-cost strategy. Put retroreflective sheeting on the signposts. The only requirement is that the color of the reflective sheeting on the signpost match the background color of the sign. So you'd use red for a stop or a yield sign. If it's a warning sign, you'd use a yellow type of post. But again, not necessarily on every sign, but on the more critical signs or where we need that sign to stand out, especially at night. And along that same theme of having things just be more visible, especially at night, is a recommendation to paint the curbing of raised channelization. Here you see it not only painted, but also outlined with reflective delineators. So just things that make features more visible. And then, of course, lighting. So for intersection lighting, it's particularly useful where we may have some deviation in the path. So sometimes at an intersection, the legs don't always line up perfectly. And so drivers may have to navigate a little awkward jog through an intersection. Well, that can be particularly hard to notice at night. So lighting those types of intersections in particular, but all intersections benefit from lighting, especially pedestrians at intersections. And so you kind of see from the diagram here that the placement of those luminaires, the light, and then you notice the pedestrian in one of the crosswalks there, that northern crosswalk. Well, notice that if we place the lighting in advance of the crosswalk, the pedestrian is going to be lit up instead of being shadowed. So in other words, if the lighting was placed between the crosswalk and the actual intersection, so like you can maybe picture that lighting maybe tilted so that it's behind the pedestrian. Well, if the lighting is shining down from behind the pedestrian, it kind of casts a shadow. And where we want that pedestrian to be visible is from an approaching driver. So consideration to actually light up the profile of a pedestrian as opposed to just having a back shadow where the pedestrian is basically dark, maybe just an outline, a dark outline from the perspective of a driver is important. So a little different or a little thought into the placement of lighting at an intersection, especially when we have pedestrians, and to try to light up the profile of the pedestrian from the viewpoint of a driver. So we're still within intersections, but we're going to go from the signing and markings to the recommendations that deal with traffic signals. So the visibility of the traffic signal heads, the choices we have in signal phasing, that's how we operate the left turns in particular at a signal, and the clearance or change intervals, the yellow change interval and the all red clearance interval. So with the signal heads themselves, the recommendation is to try to place the signal heads, and if we have a big arterial, like in this picture, say 3 lanes in each direction with turn lanes, it's not a requirement, but it is a recommendation to try to have a signal head that basically matches the number of lanes that we have. So here you see dual left turn lanes, and actually 2 left turn signals. There's 3 through lanes, 3 signal heads for the through movement, and a right turn lane. So an extra signal head for the right turn lane. Most of our intersections would usually don't have these many signal heads, but it is one recommendation so that it stands out. Obviously, most of our arterials aren't this big, aren't this wide. So there is, of course, the basic requirement to have at least 2 signal heads for the main line through movement. Of course, in case one bulb goes out, it's good to have the spare. But placing the signal head where it's visible, where it's very conspicuous, is important. And sometimes if we have curvature, placing a supplemental signal head, maybe on a pedestal, on a pole, but maybe locating it where it's visible to someone that is coming around the curve. So before they actually see the intersection, before they would actually see the overhead signals, maybe they notice a separate pole mounted or side mounted signal. So supplemental signals as appropriate. And here's an example. So this is a approach to an intersection with a curve, and you see that supplemental signal head that is really the one that's the most visible to an approaching driver. Also, to make signal heads more visible, the retroreflective border around the back plate. Now, back plates have been in use for many, many years. There was the original thought that it's very helpful for east-west roadways, where I may have the rising sun or the setting sun in the afternoon. But really, it's more than that. The back plate, and especially a retroreflective border around the back plate, just helps identify the signal. It helps it stand out. It makes it more visible. Just driving around Atlanta, where the newer installations typically include backplates and the retroreflective borders, but there are still some of the older original installations. And I notice in particular, like in Atlanta, we have a lot of trees. And you can be driving down a roadway and you see that that signal without the backplate, without the border, and in the summertime, a nice green tree, nice big gorgeous tree behind it, but you almost lose the green ball, you almost lose the green light. So anything we can do to help make the signal stand out. And another advantage of the retroreflective border, and of course at night it really becomes a big help, but there's another group of the population that this really helps, and that is people who have color blindness issues. And color blindness also has different degrees, but the green, red, difficulty of distinguishing those colors does affect a significant part of our overall population. And so by having that retroreflective border, it helps those individuals better identify whether it's the bottom light that is illuminated, the green light, or the red light, the top light. So that's how people who are totally unable to distinguish the color between green and red, they're able to tell what indication is on the signal based upon its relative placement. But having that border makes it simpler to know which is on the bottom and which is on the top. So retroreflective signal backplates, good thing to have. This example that doesn't have the retroreflective backplates. Not every installation is perfect, but this is getting into protected left turn signal phasing, the green arrow or the red arrow, and as opposed to protective permissive. So this is an important decision. This is an important operational decision. And if your agency owns and operates traffic signals, this is a trade-off, and one where perhaps we're seeing an evolution of thought. So there are, if your agency doesn't already have guidelines, that there are recommended practices, and it really comes down to multiple considerations, like how many left turn lanes do I have? In the Southeast, Georgia included, if we have dual left turn lanes, chances are it's going to be protected only. It's not a requirement. Actually, if you go out west, like in Colorado in particular, the Denver metropolitan area, if you drive around the Denver metro area, you will see many agencies that will operate dual left turn lanes using permissive abilities, a combination of protected permissive or permissive only in rare cases, but protected permissive or the permissive option for dual left turn lanes is something that you will see around the country. But again, it's not common in the Southeast. So most agencies will say, if we're going to have dual left turn lanes, we're going to go protected only. But it's not a national requirement. The number of opposing through lanes. So how many lanes do I have coming at me? How many lanes do I have to make a judgment for? Some agencies will say, if I have more than 3 lanes or more than 2, so some agencies will restrict it. If they have 3 lanes coming at them, they'll go protected only. But some agencies, even with 4 lanes coming on the approach, may still choose to allow a protected permissive type of operation. The speed of oncoming traffic, that's another consideration. Some agencies will say for higher speeds, like let's say 40 or above or 45 or higher, they will make the choice to go protected only. Or the volumes. What volume do I have on the oncoming volume that we have to make a judgment on, and how many vehicles are actually making the left turn? Sight distance. Sometimes if I don't have a nice straight roadway and there's curvature or a crest hill, that may dictate going to protected only. And then, of course, crash history. That's the one that we always can fall back on. If we have a crash problem at an intersection, maybe making a decision to change the mode of the left turn phasing. So instead of allowing a permissive left, maybe just going protected only, so that drivers go when they have a green arrow, and don't use something like a flashing yellow arrow or the green bulb, because that involves a driver decision. So those are the factors. How many lanes are we coming across? Is it if it's dual left turn lanes, most agencies will automatically go with protected only. And what are the speeds on the approach, and considerations for sight distance. So if any of those kick in, gravitate toward the protected only. And then, of course, the overarching one, the orange cloud up there, is for safety reasons. And I guess if we're seeing a trend, it's probably more toward having opportunities to maybe do more with protected only. That's one thing. I mentioned the flashing yellow arrow. And the flashing yellow arrow, which we are seeing more and more use of in Georgia, and states and areas around the country typically do see that safety benefit with a flashing yellow arrow because research has shown it's more easily understood by drivers what that means. But another aspect of the flashing yellow arrow is more flexibility in terms of switching from a protected only or a protected permissive condition or even a permissive only by time of day. So we mentioned that the volumes of oncoming traffic is one of those considerations. So maybe during higher volume conditions, we don't allow a permissive and we go protected only, but maybe during lower volume conditions, if the other factors allow, if sight distance is good, if I have a reasonable number of lanes coming on that approach to maybe go with a protected permissive or maybe permissive only during the lower volume conditions. So flashing yellow arrow has opened up all kinds of flexibilities in these decisions about what type of left turn signal phasing. Visibility, the sight distance is a very important factor, and this is recommendations for what the oncoming sight distance should be. And we talked earlier about the positive offset of left turn lanes. So if we have, or at least if we don't have the negative offset, but if we have positive offset, that generally allows for even greater sight distance of oncoming vehicles. But these are the recommendations, and it's equivalent to about 5.5 seconds of travel time at the approaching speed of oncoming traffic that we have to judge a gap for to make that permissive left. So the other aspect of traffic signals is the yellow clearance interval, and then perhaps a all red, it's a yellow change interval, my mistake using the terminology incorrectly. It's a yellow change interval as we're changing from the green to the red, and then perhaps a all red. Now, you would think that the yellow change interval, the all red clearance interval is a minor detail, right? No, it is actually very complex. It is actually something that is undergoing a lot of debate. It's something undergoing a lot of research. If we look at what is currently shown in our Federal Highway Administration's Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, it talks about the yellow change interval and the all red clearance interval, but the guidance is really wide open. And it says we determine it using engineering practices. So the MUTCD doesn't really help you much. It gives us the minimum or a maximum. So the yellow change interval should be a minimum of 3 seconds, maximum of 6, somewhere in between. And typically for an all red, 1 second, 2 seconds. But between that seemingly short range of options, there is a lot of debate, a lot of discussion. Just last year, the Institute of Transportation Engineers issued guidelines for determining traffic signal change and clearance intervals, and it created quite a lot of debate, a lot of stir. It did make some changes to the previous guidelines that were issued as part of a National Cooperative Highway Research Program report. And it does involve some kinematics to it, so that the size of the intersection, the number of lanes that we are clearing does make a difference. The differences for a through movement versus a left turn movement are accounted for. But I will just be open and honest and say there is not universal agreement or a consensus of opinion on this, and so it is still further undergoing more discussion, more debate, more research. But it's important to keep on top of what the best practices are and try to adhere to good practices, but also consistency. Try to maintain some consistency within a jurisdiction on what we choose for the yellow clearance and the yellow change and the all red clearance intervals. So for intersections, the last topic is on pedestrian crossings. And so a couple of things I'll talk about: the pedestrian clearance time, leading pedestrian interval, and the use of high visibility markings for crosswalks. So for the pedestrian walking speed at a signalized intersection, so in other words, our pedestrian signal, when we give the walk indication and then a flashing don't walk, say with a countdown timer as well, we have to make an assumption with regard to at what speed is a pedestrian walking, right? Because we're trying to calculate the clearance for a pedestrian to be able to safely clear the crosswalk in the time that we are providing. Well, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices talks about an assumption of 3.5 feet per second as the travel speed of a pedestrian. And generally speaking, that accommodates a good high percentage of the population. However, where we have pedestrians who are slower, maybe in a wheelchair, maybe or just walking slower, the FHWA handbook suggests considering 3 feet per second, a slower walking speed. So if we're in an area where maybe we have a senior center, senior housing, that it may be beneficial to assume a lower pedestrian walking speed. So 3.5 feet per second is the highest assumed speed we can use according to the MUTCD, but a slower speed in certain contexts might be more appropriate. And then the leading pedestrian interval. So in this picture, you'll see that the signal head is still red. And this also includes that illuminated or blank out sign where it can go dark when it's not needed. But you see the no right turn lit up. And then you see the walk indication. So this is giving the pedestrian a head start, a leading pedestrian interval in the signal. So it shows the walk sign. It hopefully allows the pedestrian to claim the crosswalk, enter the crosswalk, establish their presence in the crosswalk, and the no right turn on red, so that the right turning vehicles are hopefully held up. They're stopped. And where this can be very helpful is at an intersection where there is a very high right turn movement. Now, the right turn on red typically going to occur while usually the other direction has the green, so the pedestrian wouldn't be moving. But picture this scenario where you have a very heavy demand for right turns at an intersection. The light turns green, and an aggressive driver makes their turn. So basically trying to say, oh, I can turn before the pedestrian is going to be in the crosswalk. Well, sometimes that aggressive behavior can happen. And sometimes drivers are almost like follow the leader. So when the first vehicle goes and they move and make the right turn, the car behind then goes and continues, and it can be a situation where it's just a train of cars, a platoon of cars, and they're basically choking off the ability for the pedestrian to safely enter the crosswalk because they're turning in front of the pedestrians. We hope that doesn't happen, but reality is it does happen. And if you're at an intersection where that is occurring, that is an example of where a leading pedestrian interval could certainly be an effective strategy. And some agencies, as a matter of practice at say at most intersections, say in an urban setting, are gravitating toward putting in leading pedestrian intervals. You don't necessarily need the no right turn on red. You don't need the blank out sign, but it certainly reinforces that notion of let's let the pedestrian start. Let's let the pedestrian claim the crosswalk before the interference from right turning vehicles could proceed. So leading pedestrian interval, something that is caught on very, very quickly. And the last thing is the high visibility crosswalks, using the extra lines, the ladder style. In Georgia, we go with the paired lines. It's not exactly shown here, but similar to what the picture shows down at the bottom. The reason for this, the reason for the longitudinal lines, is that from a driver's perspective, that's what drivers are going to see. The high visibility crosswalk is less so for the pedestrian, more so to draw attention for a driver that, hey, this is a crosswalk. So especially useful, say at a mid-block crosswalk, but intersections as well. It just draws extra visibility to an approaching driver. So those are the intersection safety recommendations or treatments that are found in the FHWA handbook. And that is a lengthy chapter in our FHWA handbook. So let me just take a quick pause here. Let me check the chat pod for a second. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat pod, but again, if you have questions, just go ahead and post them in the chat pod. But we'll move on to interchanges and roadway segments. So let me start with interchanges. This is another area of our roadway that is overrepresented, sadly, in terms of aging user crash frequency and severity. So drivers over the age of 75 are especially overrepresented in merging and weaving maneuvers near interchange ramps, because we're dealing with higher speeds. We're dealing with less time to make decisions, and decisions have to be made if we are dealing with weaving, making lane changes, judging for gaps to safely make a lane change. So drivers over the age of 75 are overrepresented in merging and weaving type crashes. And sadly, drivers over the age of 70 are overrepresented in wrong way crashes on freeways where the driver has entered going the wrong way from an exit ramp. So at the interchange at the crossroad, they basically went down the wrong ramp. So we'll talk about some of the potential mitigation strategies for interchanges. So for the entrance ramps onto a freeway, and we have choices. The two basic choices for an entrance ramp are the parallel style acceleration lane and the tapered style acceleration lane. And in Georgia, we see a mix of the two. But for higher volume conditions, there's the general preference for the parallel style. Not only does it allow a longer distance for drivers to make a judgment about, is the lane next to me free for me to make a lane change? Do I have the space to safely merge in, enter that rightmost lane in the freeway? So if we can provide a longer distance, that is more beneficial to all drivers, but especially the aging drivers. Also, the parallel versus the tapered style, because we can provide a long taper, but another difference is the angle of the approach. So with a parallel style of acceleration lane, an older driver can better use their side view mirror as opposed to having to turn their neck We talked earlier this morning about sometimes the difficulty of turning our neck. So compared to the tapered style, the parallel style gives us more opportunity to rely on side view mirrors. So a longer acceleration lane, a parallel acceleration lane, can make it easier for older drivers to judge if there is a safe gap to safely merge or enter into the freeway. Also, the location of exit ramps. If we have exit ramps on curves, well, it increases the awkwardness of the steering path. If you think about a horizontal curve, so the picture shows a curve to the right, and then an exit ramp just beyond the curve. So not only do you have to steer to keep your position in the curve, but then you have to steer harder to exit and maintain an exit path. So the handbook recommends that we provide good sight distance in advance of an exit, and if we can, try to locate the exit at a point that is a natural steering path or an exit path. So here's an example of where a crest curve, a hill, could be blocking the actual exit point. So the signing may show where the exit is, but the driver also needs to see the physical pavement on the ground to be able to adjust their steering path. So an option could be to shift the location of that ramp nose, maybe elongate the ramp to put it on the near side of that hill. So instead of being just beyond the top of the hill, elongate the ramp and maybe locate it before the crest. So another recommendation from the handbook is with the signing, especially when it comes to the two-lane exits, where we have a choice lane, an option lane. And this has been around in the MUTCD for several years now, and this is a practice that you will see throughout Georgia. Georgia DOT has certainly evolved toward use of the arrow per lane signs. If anything, in the Atlanta area, we've got some very high volume, very complex interchanges, and the signing can get quite large, but to help drivers understand what lane is going to be available to them to make different maneuvers, whether it's a choice lane, a choice to either exit or to stay on the freeway, the arrow per lane signs have been a recommendation in the FHWA handbook for quite some time, even before they were shown in the MUTCD. Another practice recommended in the handbook that is also quite common in Georgia is these route shield pavement markings on the freeway to again help drivers understand what lane to be in as they're making decisions. And if you've driven through the connector in downtown Atlanta, you'll see a lot of these route shield markers, and to the unfamiliar driver, hopefully it gives them that supplemental guidance just to reinforce what lane to be in, because quite honestly, some interchanges can be complex, and if you're not familiar with the area and driving through, the choice to be in the proper lane to get to your proper direction, sometimes we have to go above and beyond and provide things like extra signing, the arrow per lane signing, the route shield markings. All of these help. They help all drivers, but they also help the older driver in particular. And then another practice that you find in the handbook, and it's mostly pertinent to, say, a rural interchange where we might not have lighting. And it's about recommended practices to delineate the exit gore. So things like providing raised pavement markers, but also the flexible post delineators. And at night in a rural setting, this really just helps define and delineate the exit at a freeway. Alabama DOT has started to go more toward this. If you drive through some of the interstates in Alabama at night, the rural interstates in particular, and if you go through a newer installation, you may see one of these, and it's just like, wow, this is helpful. This is really good, especially say in a foggy or rainy condition. Just helps that exit path stand out better, and is a good treatment if we don't have lighting in a rural type of setting. And so another set of recommendations focuses on trying to reduce the likelihood that a driver is going to go the wrong way down a exit ramp. Now, the studies that have been done looking at wrong way driving, as you may guess, impairment, alcohol impairment is certainly a factor in a lot of these crashes, but also older drivers, unimpaired older drivers that for whatever reason, whether they're unfamiliar with the area, just turned on a ramp that was an exit ramp, not an entrance ramp, and they found their way onto the freeway going the wrong direction. So the countermeasures, the easy countermeasures to put more signs out there in the right locations, make them larger, make them stand out. Things like lowering the height. So you see in this picture that the lower height of the wrong way and the do not enter signs. The height of a sign a lot of times is determined based upon the needs of a pedestrian that's walking, and we don't want the pedestrian to hit their head on a sign. But on a ramp, we don't have sidewalks. You may have sidewalks crossing, but where these do not enter signs are placed, it's not in conflict with where a pedestrian pathway would be. So a lowered sign height is not in conflict with a pedestrian pathway for these do not enter wrong way signs at the end of a ramp. So by lowering the sign, it basically puts it in a better visible spot, more in the line of sight of a driver. So that's why you sometimes see these do not enter signs at a lower height. And I have noticed around Atlanta, Georgia DOT has started to lower the height of the do not enter and wrong way signs, in particular along I-85 in the Atlanta area, and then supplementing them with wrong way signs or putting them on multiple locations on the ramp. So here you see a whole host of doubling up and tripling up. We can go with larger signs. GDOT has started to go toward larger signs as well. But the lower sign height, not only is it more conspicuous, but at night it's also better in terms of what its reflective value would be with headlights shining on them. And pavement markings. This is another practice that we see commonly in Georgia, and that is to use the retroreflective markings for the arrow and to have it be red in the wrong direction. So the marking could be white in the proper direction, but reflecting red in the wrong direction. And we could also use retroreflective signposts, red signposts, anything to try to get drivers' attention. And there's other things that are being experimented with. There's these directionally visible pavement marking warnings. I believe California has started to experiment with these. I think Florida, if they're not already, they're at least looking at it, and different types of strategies. So you see the do not enter on what's a stop bar basically, but it's only visible in one direction. It's not visible from traffic that is approaching in the proper direction. Same thing with those arrows on the lane marking separator. So these are interesting, and agencies are evaluating the effectiveness of these directionally visible pavement markings. But this is an issue of wrong way driving that is really something that's an issue all around the country. I commend the Florida DOT. They are trying to look at a lot of features, a lot of opportunities, but just as a matter of standard practice, that this comes from the Florida DOT standard drawings, essentially, and the doubling up or even tripling up of wrong way signs, the additional pavement markings. So you see the what could be perceived as a left turn lane, the added on pavement markings of straight only, just to indicate, don't make the left turn at that first intersection, but the left turn onto the freeway is at that downstream intersection. So it continues to be a challenge, but agencies are trying to do more and more. And of course, the geometry of the ramps can help as well, going with more angular edges of raised channelization to help guide motorists into the proper path. And then going with advanced signing, things like detection systems that maybe can detect traffic going the wrong way, and then illuminating or flashing wrong way signs are also becoming more and more common. And then, since inevitably, no matter how many signs or pavement markings we seem to put on ramps, people still go the wrong way. Well, including systems that warn drivers on the main line that a wrong way driver has been reported. So to at least alert traffic that there may be a driver coming at them the wrong way ahead. So to try to mitigate the outcome. And then lastly, lighting at interchanges, which can also help reduce the occurrence of wrong way maneuvers. So hopefully better illuminating the proper entry path and illuminating what's not the proper entry path. But as we talked about, the issue of aging and the adaptive dark to brightness issue, having uniformity along our lighting, especially for freeways, is a recommendation from the handbook. So those are the interchange related or freeway and interchange related recommendations. And then I just want to close out with two more that are related to roadway segments. And those are the countermeasures of implementing a road diet and strategies focusing on rural roadway departure. So road diets, you may have heard about the term, although actually we've evolved the term to basically a roadway reconfiguration or a lane reconfiguration. A traditional road diet is taking a 4-lane undivided road and using the same space, the same pavement, reconfiguring that 4 lanes of traffic into something else. And other common features may include bicycle lanes, on-street parking, or a center 2-way left turn lane. But we've evolved beyond that to include many different options, and it's not just 4-lane undivided roads anymore, but all kinds of streets are undergoing makeovers, do-overs, and a lot of safety benefits can be derived from that. So when we think about a roadway makeover, really from a safety standpoint, the benefit comes when we're able to separate users, simplify driver decisions, and slow vehicular traffic. Separate, simplify, and slow. So separate. Well, if we put in a 2-way left turn lane, we are basically providing separation or a buffer between opposing directions of traffic, oncoming vehicles. We also separate left turning drivers from a through lane. If a vehicle is making a left turn into a driveway or a minor street, the 2-way left turn lane gets them out of a through lane of traffic. It also improves driver sight lines. So if you think about the little buffer area that we may have, if a driver, say the driver of that blue car, for whatever reason, inadvertently crosses the center line, even by just a foot or 2 feet, that head-on collision potential is there. Well, you take the same scenario, whatever reason, if the driver was distracted, it doesn't matter, whatever the reason, the driver of that blue car, well, if they encroach into the two-way left turn lane, chances are that's buffer space. And so it may reduce the risk or the likelihood of head-on collisions by having that center two-way left turn lane. Getting the left turning vehicle out of a through lane should reduce the potential for rear end crashes. Instead of a driver waiting for a gap in oncoming traffic and occupying a through lane, they'll be in the center two-way left turn lane. And then another way we separate, of course, is if we're able to provide physical features for other user groups, like a bike lane. So we take the bicyclist out of a travel lane and they're in a bike lane. A road diet could also allow for a pedestrian refuge island. The center two-way left turn lane doesn't have to be continuous. It could also be space that becomes available for a pedestrian refuge island at a mid-block crossing. Or bus pullouts, transit pullouts, all kinds of opportunities when we free up some space. And sight lines for turning vehicles. Instead of negative offset, if I have a scenario of two cars wanting to make a left turn at a 4-lane undivided street, say they're turning into driveways or minor roads, as opposed to having the two-way left turn lane, they have better sight lines to judge for gaps in oncoming traffic. And also for drivers that are making a left turn out of the minor street. So if the minor street is stop controlled and the major street, well, they're not stopped. It's a two-way stop control. So the major street, they keep moving. It's the minor street that has the stop sign. Well, imagine having to make a left turn from that minor street and you're judging for gaps in traffic in both directions and across 4 lanes. It can be complicated. Research has shown that for all drivers, not just aging drivers, but for all drivers, we tend to underestimate gaps. We think that the gaps are longer than they actually are. Research has actually done that where they ask drivers their perception of how, either a distance or a time. Most likely it's the time. How many seconds do you have before that vehicle is going to reach the intersection? Generally speaking, as drivers, we are pretty poor at accurately judging those gaps. Good enough, it can be good enough sometimes, but when you misjudge a gap, the consequence can be fairly severe. And as we age, our ability to judge those gaps diminishes. So let's take the scenario of a 4-lane undivided street. And not only the complications of judging the gaps, but the potential issues of our sight lines being obstructed. So what if we have a scenario of a driver that is slowing down to make a right turn onto this minor street, and as they're doing so, they cast a visibility shadow behind them that can block the view from the driver that's wanting to make that left turn out of the minor street, and they don't see that vehicle that's approaching. So they think they have a safe gap, but they don't. So here's an example. View from the minor street. You see that van slowing down, the right turn directional is illuminated, and you see the school bus behind the van. Well, the school bus, a school bus has a nice big profile. We can see it. What if instead of a school bus, what if that was a small sedan? Yeah, they'd be blocked. We wouldn't be able to see it. So that type of visibility issue can happen. It does happen. It's one more complication. If we had a road diet, if we just had 1 lane in each direction, we mitigate that scenario. You don't have the shadowing of a vehicle slowing down to make the right turn. So generally speaking, road diets make it easier for us to judge those gaps as we're trying to pull out from a minor street. Another way that road diets simplify is specifically related to pedestrian safety. So in this photograph, you see the bus and you see pedestrians in a crosswalk. It's at an intersection. Now, this is a stop controlled intersection for the minor street. You can see the stop sign there and on the left side of the picture. The major street, the 4-lane undivided street, does not have a stop. It does not have a signal. It's uncontrolled. It's a minor street only stop. So you see the bus coming to a stop, and imagine yourself as the driver of that black sedan. So you're driving along this 4-lane undivided road. You see a bus ahead, and that bus in the right lane is coming to a stop. As a driver, in my mind, that's normal, a bus coming to a stop. I'm thinking it's going to stop to either pick up or discharge passengers. But what if the real reason that bus is coming to a stop is because they are stopping for pedestrians that are crossing at this location? And the main road does not have a signal, does not have a stop. So the driver of the black sedan may not see the pedestrians in the crosswalk because the bus is also blocking the view because we're approaching from behind the bus. So this is a common problem in this type of scenario. And what happens oftentimes is the car that's approaching from behind may not see the pedestrian, may not really understand why the first vehicle is stopping in the right lane. And if that vehicle is approaching from the right lane and they see the car ahead of them stopping, it may be even worse where they try to pass. I'm going to pull off into the left lane. And of course, the pedestrian may keep walking. And so we have this conflict. It's called the multiple threat crash problem or multiple threat conflict for pedestrians. Common at those types of locations. A road diet eliminates that. And then the last measure is to slow. We're going to a 4-lane undivided highway. Oftentimes, the drivers are making erratic maneuvers to try to pass. But if we go down to a 2-lane roadway, it definitely has that slowing benefit. And then the last countermeasure is specific to rural roadway departure crashes, and 3 groupings of categories. First, we try to keep vehicles in their lane in the first place, and examples of countermeasures include improved curve delineation, friction treatments on curves in particular, and edge lines, rumble strips that help keep vehicles in their lane in the first place. But then if vehicles do depart the roadway, to be able to not have a crash. So things like a safety edge that allow, if a driver, if 2 of their wheels have gone off the edge, they're able to steer back on the pavement as opposed to having to overcorrect with an abrupt drop off on the pavement. Or if they do leave the roadway, to have a clear zone free of any obstacles or a traversable side slope. And then if a crash does occur, to reduce the severity of the crash with things like breakaway supports of signs or utility poles, or shielding things that can't be breakaway, like trees or other fixed objects. So the general strategies of trying to reduce the consequences of roadway departure. So there's a host of countermeasures to keep vehicles in their lane, the countermeasures to reduce the potential for a crash occurring if a vehicle leaves the lane, and then if a crash does occur, the strategies that are implemented to minimize the crash severity. So I know that that was a lot. I've actually had some class participants say that, that this is really helpful, but it's almost like drinking out of a fire hose. And so, yeah, it can be a lot, can be overwhelming. I apologize if that seemed like it was the case. But we did want to go through the countermeasures and just have a chance to talk about them and explain them. They are all found in that FHWA handbook. And so with that, let me check the chat pod here. And I've got more. Oh, thank you for posting those direct web links. That's fantastic. So let me just ask if there's any other questions that you have, please, by all means, enter them into the chat pod. We've got a few minutes before we wind down here. All right, not seeing any, but well, I guess we will try to make these slides available. Is that correct?
That is correct. We will send out slides to the PDF to the slides in a day or two to everyone who registered, just so that people who had a conflict and couldn't attend can also have access to those. There would be a little bit of a delay before the recording becomes available, but when we have that processed and posted, we will also email everybody again with a link to that. And I have put contact information in the chat. Remember, if you're interested in the 55+ driver safety program, Yellow Dot, Car Fit, or our task team, you can always contact us. Or if you have data requests or need resources, we can probably find those for you. And just want to reiterate our thanks to Mark for this terrific presentation, and thank all of you for attending.
Thank you, Lila. I do see one question in there from Phil about suggestions for reducing speed in. Help me out, Phil. What do you mean by the S&Ds? If you could just spell that out for me in the chat. So I'm not sure. Subdivisions. Thank you. Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah. So residential areas, especially where the street exists, and sometimes it's the straight the straight streets where maybe we would love traffic to go at 15 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, but the conditions are such that they can just blow on through. So whether you love them or hate them, the things that I've seen used and they are, for the most part, very effective, or things like the speed blisters, or the kidneys. They're basically ways to induce very abrupt curvature that drivers will have to slow down, or else they will hit it. Now, hitting it, we don't want it to cause any serious harm. So there's different options. You don't want to put a tree right in the middle there, but when you go fast and you hit these things, it will mess up your alignment. So it's not likely to cause a crash or a severe injury. But yeah, sometimes it's a fine line between being a very enforcing, but also when folks hit it hard, yeah, it will. They'll remember it. They will remember it. So yeah, we're seeing more and more of those. They've been around a while, of course, nothing new. And of course the reemergence of speed humps. Which also, I think the way to for both of those treatments, the traffic calming features. I think one thing that is very important is, of course, getting your community behind it, and a lot of agencies have very effective programs where these requests are initiated by the community. They're basically highly endorsed by the community, and of course, it's the cut-through drivers that are the ones that are often doing the speeding, and they're the ones that are oftentimes controlled by those devices. So very good. Yeah, not anything too new on the way of the traffic calming devices that at least that I have seen lately. Very good. So thank you, everybody. Again, my contact information should also be in the materials. It'll certainly be in the PowerPoints. By all means, feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions about things that we discussed today, or other things intersection related. I love intersection challenges. If you've got a tough intersection project and you got a challenging situation, I love a good challenge. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. So with that, Lila, I think I don't see any further questions in the chat pod. I again want to thank you for helping arrange all this. And
a pleasure.
great having Elizabeth join us. Sorry we missed Jim, but I'm sure we'll catch up with him again. And thank you to everybody for participating today. Take care and stay safe.
Bart.
Thank you.